continue on this 10th anniversary of the opening of Guantanamo, which falls right around the same date that President Obama vowed to close the prison 3 years ago. Shortly after taking office in January 2009, President Obama signed an executive order calling for Guantanamo's closure within a year.
In order to effect the appropriate disposition of individuals currently detained by the Department of Defense at Guantanamo and promptly to close the detention facility at Guantanamo consistent with the national security and foreign policy interests of the United States and the interests of justice, I hereby order.
Since making that pledge, Obama's faced bipartisan opposition in Congress, with lawmakers blocking funds preventing the transfer of Guantanamo prisoners to U.S. soil. The latest Pentagon spending bill signed into law by President Obama mandates indefinite imprisonment for al-Qaeda prisoners. On Monday, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney said President Obama is still determined to close Guantanamo.
The commitment the president has to closing Guantanamo Bay is as firm today as it was during the campaign. We are all aware of the obstacles to getting that done as quickly as the president wanted to get it done, what they were, and the fact that they continue to persist. But the president's commitment hasn't changed at all. And it's the right thing to do for our national security interests.
That was White House Secretary Jay Carney. For more on this 10th anniversary of Guantanamo, we're joined by several guests. In a moment, we'll go to London to speak with a former Guantanamo prisoner. But first to Air Force Colonel Omar Deghayes, the former chief prosecutor at Guantanamo. He resigned his position in 2007 in protest of what he called political interference in the military commissions of Guantanamo prisoners. Joining us from Washington, D.C. Omar Deghayes, thank you for joining us. You are now opposed to the military commissions. You were the former chief prosecutor at Guantanamo. Why have you changed your stance?
Well, it's been more than a decade now since President Bush first authorized military commissions, and in that decade, we've completed a grand total of 6 trials, which is not exactly a ringing endorsement for the military commissions process. You know, as you know, the case went to the Supreme Court that said the initial military commissions President Bush created were fatally defective. Congress passed a statute in 2006 that President Obama said was deficient, another statute in 2009. So we keep telling the world over and over, this time we've got it right. And I think after a decade of failure, it's just time to give up on this process.
You heard Jay Carney talking about national security issues. How would you define national security? What do you think needs to happen at Guantanamo?
I think we need to close Guantanamo. It's become such a negative symbol, like Abu Ghraib. Just the term itself, Guantanamo, around the world conveys a message about the United States and what we represent. It was interesting yesterday hearing the State Department spokesman or spokeswoman talking about the case of Amir Khatami, the American citizen convicted in an Iranian court, which is indeed unfortunate. But she criticized their process, saying that here's a guy that was detained under suspicious circumstances, had a trial in secret, using a confession that was coerced. And I'm sitting there looking at this going, it sounds an awful lot like what we do at Guantanamo. So we lose our moral standing and our ability to really complain when others do pretty much what we've done at Guantanamo. So it's not in our interest to maintain that kind of image around the world.
What is your assessment of the bill that President Obama has just signed off on?
Well, I think it's a complete act of cowardice on his part. As I've stated before, I think on Inauguration Day, somewhere between the Capitol and the White House, a pair of testicles fell off the president because he said all the right things, he made all the right promises, and there's been a complete lack of leadership from the White House to deliver. You know, he threatened to veto the bill, which proved to be a hollow threat. And on New Year's Eve, he signed it into law, which is not a dramatic departure from what the policy's been for the last few years, but now it's law, where Guantanamo appears to be made permanent, to where the military, and it's not a role that the military wants, has become the Bureau of Prisons for terrorism suspects. So it's, you know, in this season of campaign in 2012, nobody's going to get elected or reelected saying, I stood up for the rights of detainees at Guantanamo. And so on the far right, you've got, it seems that no one can be too dumb or too hateful in campaigning on the right.
As we continue with Air Force Colonel Morris Davis, former chief prosecutor at Guantanamo, resigned in 2007 in protest of what he called political interference in the military commissions of Guantanamo prisoners, joining us from D.C. Joining us from London is former Guantanamo prisoner Omar Deghayes, a Libyan citizen who has residency status in Britain, was held in U.S. custody after he was arrested in Pakistan from May 2002 to December 2007, spent most of that time at Guantanamo after being held first in Pakistan and at Bagram. We're also joined in London by Michael Ratner, president of the New York-based Center for Constitutional Rights. He was at a press conference with Omar Deghayes today in London at the Frontline Club. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! From London. Morris Davis, of course, from Washington, D.C. Michael Ratner, can you talk about the lawsuit Center for Constitutional Rights has just filed?
I can't really, Amy. That was filed while I've been in London, so I can't really talk about that. We know about the videotapes of torture. We're obviously trying to get a hold of those. The government claims to have destroyed them, but we are trying to get them in a lawsuit, as you said. I'm here with Omar, and of course I'm here for the 10th anniversary of Guantanamo, and I want to make a couple of points that I don't think have been brought out. One of them is, of course, when Obama definitively signed an order to close Guantanamo in a year, what now appears in retrospect are two issues. One is that he immediately backtracked on that order, and secondly, that he never intended to shut down Guantanamos around the world. He really intended to get rid of the symbol by moving the people out of Guantanamo, maybe to the United States. But as indicated by the current order and the NDAA that was signed, the authority to pick up and detain people like Omar or others around the world is still an authority he has and that he exercises. So when we say close Guantanamo, it's not just closing the physical place of 171 people. As uncivilized and as outrageous as that place is, it's really ending the power, the uncivilized power of this government, this United States government, to go around the world plucking people up all over the world.
Omar Deghayes, can you talk about what happened to you? Begin in Pakistan in 2002.
Yeah, I can describe how we were surrounded and then chained and with the family. I was in Pakistan with my wife and a child, a baby child of 6 months old, and how we were chained and then covered, our heads were covered, and without any accusation of anything. The only reason being an Arab being in Pakistan. The government in Pakistan was selling Arabs, all the Arabs who were in Pakistan were, there was a payment made for every person who was handed to the Americans, and so some of the government in Pakistan resorted to getting money from the United States by selling Arabs who lived in Pakistan for a certain time. So we were chained and then head covered and then sent to Bagram base. We were tortured in Bagram and then from Bagram to Guantanamo. And what I could describe is the conditions for many people who are still there in Guantanamo and in Bagram and in other secret prisons where people are subjected to all sorts of humiliation and mistreatment. People are locked up in isolation camps. They are put through such mistreatment that many people, have we heard, have died. And people lost their hands, lost their eyes, lost their limbs. Some people were subjected to sleep deprivation. They weren't allowed to sleep. They were kept into cells where lights are open 24 hours every day and night, and they had to live under those conditions for 6 years. People were where we were subjected to beatings, fare every day, daily fare, and all sorts of mistreatment without being convicted of any crime, which is the most unacceptable thing. If you think about it, 10 years, a decade, and there are many people still in prison and they haven't been convicted of anything, and they're subjected to all sorts of unlawfulness. The guards could do anything they wanted, in simple terms.
I'm wondering if Morris Davis can come into this discussion. Air Force Colonel, quit as chief prosecutor at Guantanamo. Talk about what these commissions were that you presided over before you quit, as you listened to Omar Deghayes describe the conditions there.
Well, military commissions were, Guantanamo was selected because there were people in the Bush administration thought it was beyond the reach of the law. And then military commissions, they look back at 1942 and the trial of the 8 Nazi saboteurs who, from the time they were captured through the Supreme Court to the time they were executed and buried, took 43 days by a military commission conducted in secret, and they thought that was the model. It certainly hadn't worked out that way. And unfortunately, we sit here more than a decade later. I mean, we used to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. We've become the constrained and the cowardly for the past decade. And I would like to see us reverse that and get back to the principles that this country was founded on, which are strength being the law and not running from the law.
I wanted to turn to former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and former President George W. Bush, and these clips from January 2002, 1 year into President Bush's presidency, both defended the conditions of prisoners at Guantanamo.
That if someone looked down from Mars on the United States for the last 3 days, they would conclude that America is what's wrong with the world. America is not what's wrong with the world. And what's taking place down there is responsible, it's humane, it's legal, it's proper, it's consistent with the Geneva Conventions, and after a period, that will sink in. Let there be no doubt.
We are adhering to the spirit of the Geneva Convention. When you say you're holding the prisoners in the manner you are, we're giving them medical care, they're being well treated. There is no allegation, or there may be an allegation, there's no evidence that we're treating them outside the spirit of the Geneva Convention. And for those who say we are, they just don't know what they're talking about.
Air Force Colonel Morris Davis, former chief prosecutor at Guantanamo, your response?
Well, I'll give you an example. Susan Crawford, who has worked for Dick Cheney at the Defense Department, was appointed to be in charge of the military commissions during the Bush administration. In January 2009, in an interview with Bob Woodward published in the Washington Post a week before President Bush left office, she said the case of Mohammed al-Qahtani she did not refer to trial because, in her words, quote, "we tortured al-Qahtani." So this notion that everything was fit and humane, I think, is clearly refuted by, Republican appointee Susan Crawford, who said we tortured Qahtani at Guantanamo.
And, of course, that's exactly what the lawsuit filed by the Center for Constitutional Rights is all about, is making public the videotapes of the interrogation carried out on Qahtani, on this Saudi citizen, saying videotapes have been seen by his attorneys but can't be shown to the public because they're classified. He remains at Guantanamo. I wanted Omar Deghayes to weigh in as you listen to former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, former President Bush, on the conditions that you faced at Guantanamo.
No, definitely. It's incredible to hear them speak like that, and especially that now we have the testimony of many people who were working in Guantanamo, from the FBI, from the CIA, even from guards who used to do those wrong acts. They came to London and they spoke publicly in universities and open conferences about the awfulness and the things that went on inside Guantanamo, and they regretted it and they apologized to us from doing so. So to hear somebody in that position in the United States to openly, categorically say things like that, I think it's a big lie, and he should be embarrassed from saying something like this, especially that the same people that they employ in Guantanamo, from the FBI and the CIA and others, have reported already in their books, some in their books and some openly in different meetings. They spoke about the mistreatment that went on in Guantanamo, and they described, I know myself of many people who've lost limbs. I say, we know people who've died, a couple of people who've died in Guantanamo. We know people who everybody was sexually abused, and the torture that went on and the stress position that went on. This was the norm in Guantanamo. And not only that, they had all sorts of experiments going on where they would abuse religion, they would use anything that was held sacred to the Guantanamo prisoners. They tried to exploit it, and they tried to cause as much hurt and imbalance to people, because I think they thought that by causing these awful acts, they could extract more information from people who are kept in Guantanamo. And to keep people after 10 years, I think they should even question the usefulness of keeping people. What kind of information would they expect to extract from people who they couldn't find any evidence against, nor could they convict them of any crime?